Good morning. Today we're going to be tying up, this is just a great pattern. I know I say that a lot, but I really like this one a lot. This is a Copper Baetis. It's a really good alternative to a Pheasant Tail, a Hare's ear. I've got a size 16 hook in the vise that's kind of a heavy scud hook. So obviously this is not going to be a dry fly. This is going to be a nymph. It's going to sink down to the bottom. And I'm just using some 18-aught orange nano silk. And I'm using orange just because it blends in with the copper a little bit. I'm going to start out with a Pheasant Tail, which I'm going to use for a tail. I want that about the length of the shank of the hook there. And I want this to stay on top. And I also want to make sure that this thread jumps back towards my fingers here. So I'm going to twist my thread kind of counterclockwise. And I just really want to tack that in and get it kind of sitting in place. I don't want to take a lot of wraps because I need to get a couple more materials in here. So next we're going to turn to some Flashabou. This is just a copper colored, which makes sense since this is a Copper Baetis. I've got much more than what I need, but that's okay. I'm going to tie this in. Again, I want to keep this tacked in right at the back, so I'm going to just kind of capture this with a thread wrap or two. Or maybe even just one, if we can get away with it. So we're going to give it a 1, and then we're going to go to our last material before we start working on the abdomen here. And I'm just going to use a piece of small or brassie copper wire. Tack that in with a thread wrap or two. And after I've got that tacked in, I'm going to pull the feathers, the fibers of my pheasant tail backwards a little bit while I proceed up the shank of the hook. And I can just go ahead and capture what's left of that Flashabou as well as that piece of copper wire. I do want that copper wire to stay right along the side of the shank of the hook if I can. So one thing that I'm doing here that I didn't talk about already, because sometimes I just get carried away, is the angle that I have that hook on. When I'm tying these first materials in, especially because I want to get that first couple of materials in tied with just a wrap or two, and I want it around the back of the hook, a couple of things that I'm doing here. One is I've got wax on my thread so it'll grip and it'll stay in place, but I've also put that hook on a steep angle that you can see pointing straight down. So it's exposing this back part by the bend, which will allow that to keep that from sliding as much. But now that we're there, I can go ahead, I'm going to loosen this up from the jaws of my vise, and we're just going to pivot it back to its final position where I want to finish tying this. And when I finish tying this, I want that top to be just about horizontal. So I've gone ahead and put my thread in a bobbin cradle here. We worked on just a tiny little bit of taper. I don't want a really thick body here. I'm going to take my first wrap of copper Flashabou here, and I'm going to tie that behind that piece of pheasant tail, and then I'm going to pull that pheasant tail back, and we're going to proceed up the body. Just taking touching turns here. You want to be careful of the hook point, because when you're pulling with some pressure and you hit the hook point with Flashabou, it's going to break right off. We're just going to continue that right up. And this is going to create a really nice copper underbelly abdomen on this pattern. We're just going to work our way right up. To about where we want that thorax to start and our abdomen to end. Right about there is going to be fine for me. I'm going to go ahead and take my thread off the bobbin cradle, move that cradle out of the way. We'll just secure that. The other reason it's good to use the orange thread here, at least for me, is in places where that Flashabou is peeking out a little bit. it's going to blend in really nicely with the copper. So now that I've got that in place, I'm going to go ahead and come in with my scissors. I'm going to go clip that off. Next, we're going to grab the pheasant tail fibers that are left over from tying our tail, and we want those right over the top of the shank of the hook here. So I'm going to kind of hold them out and make sure I get them with a wrap about right where I want them. I'm going to just take a couple of thread wraps to secure those in place. I'll pull them backwards, take a couple of thread wraps. I'm using nano silk like I mentioned at the beginning, so it's more forgiving in terms of creating too much of a buildup. Once I've got that done, we'll go ahead and grab our last material, which is our copper wire, and we're just going to take some open wraps over the top of the pheasant tail, and it's going to create a nice ribbed abdomen, while at the same time kind of securing both the Flashabou and the pheasant tail. I'm going to just take that right up here to where I'm going to have that thorax start. And I don't mind having a little bit of extra weight there, so I can go ahead and take an extra wrap or two. We're going to wrap back on it a little bit. From here, we're just going to helicopter our copper wire until it breaks off. For the thorax, we're just going to turn to some eye stub in the copper color. I've got it broken up and in my fingers and ready to dub, so I'm just going to try to dub that as tightly as I can. Being eye stub, it's going to be not quite as tight around the thread as like a superfine would be, but I'm going to work on getting at least those first few wraps on here pretty tight. I'm going to move that up, and I'm going to wrap backwards a few wraps because that's where I want this thorax to start. And I'm going to tighten my dubbing a little bit as I'm working my way up towards behind the eye of the hook. About like that. So we're going to turn back to our pheasant tail, and we're going to take a clump of 5 or 6 fibers here. It says a size 16. I probably didn't mention that at the beginning. So I'm going to tie one set of legs in on the lens side of the hook here. And I just want to take a wrap or two is all. And then I'm going to kind of arrange that to be on the side where I want it. And then I can go ahead and pull this back. I want those wings to be maybe a little shorter than the length of the body, but not a lot more. So I'm not going to take a bunch of wraps here. I'm just going to take that many. We'll cut off the excess, and then we'll go back to our pheasant tail to grab our next chunk. So we're going to tie this next little bunch in on my side of the hook, similar to what we just did. Just taking a couple of thread wraps, then I can make that adjustment, shorten those down so that they're the same length as those on the other side. With that, I'm just going to go ahead and secure those down. We'll come in with our scissors and we'll go ahead and clip the balance of that pheasant tail off. So we should be looking about like that right now. Hopefully you can see that, where we've got the legs sticking out from either side. Finally, we're going to go back to our copper eye stub. I'm going to dub a little bit more on here that we're going to take back into those wings, legs. Make sure that those legs are pointing nice and backwards. We're going to tie this on top of it. It's going to clean it up. It's going to finish off our nice thorax here. And if you've got too much, actually the eye stub is probably one of the better ones for dubbings to be forgiving, because it's so dang stringy. So I've got more than I needed, which happens from time to time. So I've got it secured down. I'm just going to turn my fly upside down here with my rotary. Grab those fibers there and clean those up just a little bit. Once I've got a few of those wraps on here, we're just going to grab our whip finisher. Most of my whip finish wraps I want to take back towards that copper thorax rather than by the eye. I'm just going to take a few of those wraps kind of backwards. You can see hopefully that orange is blending in nicely with that copper. And once I'm done with that, I can just go ahead and grab my thread cutter. With that, we're done. Wonderful pattern, the Copper Baetis. Get some of these in your box. especially when the pheasant tails, hare's ears aren't working. Put this on. Sometimes I'll just start with this. A wonderful pattern. Throw a hook in your vise and give this one a go.